It's 2019. Barnes & Noble started in 2009. It's their 10-year anniversary. They just released the Barnes & Noble Nook Glowlight Plus 7.8-inch device, and it is a 2019 model. It's not to be confused with the Glowlight Plus. But in case you're confused, and in case you're wondering why they all look different, we're going to give you a 10-year wrap-up of Barnes & Noble Nook. The Nook, or the Nook First Edition, or the Nook Classic, or just the Barnes & Noble Nook e-reader. This one came out in 2009, and it featured a 6-inch screen, which was totally normal, had an SD card, which now everyone has forgotten. It had Android, but it was a skinned version of Android, and it had something very interesting on it. It had a 3.5-inch color LCD panel at the bottom that was a screen in and of itself. You could navigate things like games, and you can swipe the carousel to open different things on it. And because this was at the very beginning of when e-readers kind of started to become e-readers, we wouldn't know if this was normal or not, but we saw that no one else has adopted this technology even close. This thing sold very well. It looked really good. It had a piano finish on it, had really good styling. It was really long. It felt super technologically advanced. It was very nice to see e-readers starting out this way. Amongst the complete design overhauls that Barnes & Noble will be known for after this device, none more are evident than this one, the Barnes & Noble Simple Touch. This one sold very well, but it looked really weird, and they completely did away with that LCD screen at the bottom in just their second device. In a 2-year span, they just got rid of that. They got rid of the white design, they got rid of the slim design, and they went with this chunky, clunky, thick, gigantic bezel device. This had some of the thickest bezels we've ever seen on an e-reader, and actually the most recent released device, 2019, still employed this, and we'll get into that later. This was released in 2011, still made by Foxconn, still had Android, still had a 6-inch screen, still had an SD card, just looked completely different than the last one. A year later, in April 2012, they released this one, the Simple Touch with Glowlight. Now, you have to credit them because the whole Glowlight trend, Barnes & Noble kicked it off. Granted, they didn't do it very well, although comparatively we had nothing to compare it to, so in that aspect they did it extremely well because it worked. But it featured kind of blue purpley LEDs, and the screens had a lot of tears in them, and there were tons of problems, and the light distribution wasn't that great, but they did do it first, and they did kick off basically every other company adopting Glowlights. The Nook Color. This was not an e-reader anymore. This was a tablet, and everyone thought we would be getting the same kind of e-ink technology, but no, it was just a tablet. But most importantly, this came out in 2010 when tablets were just starting to get really, really popular, and Nook already had a name for themselves, and they had stores that they could release them in. And this time when you had Android, you actually had Android. You could really feel that Android was on here. It didn't have the most amazing specs, but back then, I mean, we're so spoiled now with high-spec devices. Back then it was amazing, and the Nook Color looked great. It had a little signature loop at the bottom. They kept the N logo that acted as a home button or menu button depending on the device, and it looked fantastic. It was priced really well. It was around the $149, $169 mark. It wasn't going to break the bank, and it sold extremely well with both Barnes & Noble themselves and resellers. As they saw Amazon Kindle Fires, yes, they were the Kindle Fire back then, showing great success, Barnes & Noble continued their trend and released the Nook Tablet. This was the follow-up to the Nook Color. This thing was pretty much the same price. It was only $10 more at launch, but you got a better, more advanced operating system, higher version of Android, double the memory, 1 gig of RAM, double the storage, but for some reason your display was the exact same resolution, but it was actually 1 ppi less. But the thing was overall more refined. Everything just felt faster, felt more crisp, the battery lasted longer, and this was right when tablets were kind of getting extremely popular, so they released it at the perfect time. Again though, it wasn't an e-reader. The Nook HD and HD Plus. This was getting into HD territory right around when they needed to. The resolution was upped, the processor was up, the Android version was doubled. We're at Android 4 at this point. You had two models, the 7-inch model and a 9-inch model with a dual-core 1.5 gigahertz processor. A 9-inch model. You don't see almost any 9-inch devices anymore. Everything's 10.3, 10s, 8s, 7s, 6, 5s, 4s, I mean everything but 9 for some reason. This thing did alright, but people were starting to get a little bit confused because this was yet another generation of devices that weren't e-readers. They still had decent styling, the little N logo and the signature loop, I guess that they made a signature for themselves, on the bottom left corner of the device, but when would we see another e-reader from them? The Nook Glowlight. This was released in 2013, 2 years after the last device that was e-ink was released. Yet again, another complete overhaul of design choices. This thing was white and it had a gray rubber bezel around the outside of the white plastic bezel. This thing was actually squishy rubber. It was like a rubber grommet that went around the whole device, and it peeled back extremely easily as if you were supposed to take it off, but if you do take it off, it kind of stretches and never goes back the way it should be. And they got rid of the physical page turn buttons, but they kept a little N at the bottom. And it was a 6-inch, and again, they had a glow light, but didn't have the screen at the bottom. So at this point, we were kind of understanding that that little screen at the bottom wasn't going to be the way e-readers were supposed to be, seeing that in 4 years at this point, we've never seen it adopted since. This device was completely overhauled yet again. It looked like a bar of soap. The glow light, again, had lots of tears in it. It was very blue. We didn't know if this was a really good direction to go in after having 2 generations of color tablets. 2014 and 2015 for Barnes & Noble were embarrassing. And reason being, they did this, the Samsung Galaxy Tab for Nook. It didn't make any sense. They had the Samsung Galaxy Tab, they had the Samsung Galaxy Tab 10.1, and then they went over to the Samsung Galaxy Tab S2 and then the Tab E. And this was all for Nook, and they'd spent 2 years doing this. And what it was it was a Samsung Galaxy tablet that had a couple preloaded Nook apps that when you opened the box and turned on the tablet, you could long press them and uninstall them. The box had some Nook logoing on it, but it was a Samsung device, 110% all the way through. Barnes & Noble didn't make it. Barnes & Noble didn't design it. They didn't do anything to it. They just put some apps on it. Preloaded, kind of bundled together applications. They had stuff like the Nook Store and a couple other applications that were just Nook centric, but it didn't make any sense. And they did this for 2 generations and made several devices and kept, releasing them, and it was in their stores. And again, no e-reader. Finally, in 2015 October, they released the Nook Glowlight Plus, sharing its name exactly with the one that is released 4 years later, this year, the Nook Glowlight Plus. They don't even write anything different on the box. We just try to differentiate by saying the 7.8. They finally released it. This one has another 6-inch screen, 4 gigs of storage, 4.4.2 Android. It had a decent screen, 300 ppi, 1448 by 1072. The thing was that it was cheap. It was $129, and the Glowlight was refined a little bit more. So it didn't have all those tears on it. It didn't have the terrible light distribution and all the puffing at the top. But again, you have to look at the styling, and the thing was weird. It was white on the front, flush screen and bezel granted, but it had this weird kitchen tile textured around the bezel. They kept the N button, but then on the back it was this rose gold pink aluminum brushed panel that wrapped around to the front, and it wasn't even ever that secure because every device we've ever seen had a noticeable gap between that weird metal panel and the kitchen tile glass that went over the whole device's screen. So again, a far cry from what the device used to look like. This device sold all right, but then guess what they did next? In August of 2016, they released this, the Samsung Galaxy Tab A Nook. We've been in the industry since 2008, 2009. I don't, on a business level or a personal level, I don't know who asked for this. After 4 devices in 2 generations and 2 years of basically failed Samsung Nook branded devices, they make an e-reader and then re-release another Samsung Nook branded device. Again, it was nothing different, it was nothing special, it just took a generic Samsung device, made the price extremely low, $139, didn't have anything particularly amazing about it, 216 ppi, which is actually 100 ppi less than the previous e-reader they made, and it just didn't make a whole lot of sense to release yet another Samsung device. We didn't really understand, and I personally couldn't understand it. So out of a total of 5 Barnes & Noble Nook branded Samsung generic device releases, you would think they'd make another e-reader to kind of just put that to bed. Well, no, they made another tablet. This is the Nook tablet, the one that released in 2016 November. There was absolutely nothing special about it, and I am being serious, and I'll tell you why. It had 8 gigs on it, it had 1024 by 600, 171 ppi, which is actually 50 ppi less than the previous Samsung Galaxy A tab for Nook. The thing was about this one, though, is that it was $49, and it was made specifically to rival the Amazon Fire tablets that were basically a race to the bottom at this point for whoever could release the cheapest tablet from one of the 2 major brands at the time. But this thing, it was completely cookie cutter. It was black on the front, black on the back, no flash package. It had done away with the little N at the bottom, done away with any styling cues, done away with the signature, quote unquote, little loop at the bottom that they haven't touched in years. The thing was actually pretty silly to be released when it did, and only for the fact to compete with the Amazon Fire. They brought absolutely nothing interesting to this tablet. You guys might be thinking I'm going a little bit hard on the Barnes & Noble line of tablets, and that is because I am. Because at this point in time, they have released 2 times more tablets than they actually have e-readers, and this is coming from a bookseller company that has bookstores and e-ink booths and e-readers that they sell, and for some reason they just keep releasing tablets and tablets and tablets until this happened. The Barnes & Noble Nook Glowlight 3 released in 2017. This one had returned to the Glowlight and the e-ink scene. This was awesome because it was a 6-inch screen, it was simple, it went back to the simple touch stylings, didn't do any of that other garbage that they were throwing out there, and this one actually used 2 sets of LEDs in different colors, the white bluish tone and then the orange reddish tone that you can actually control. This was the very beginning of the whole warm lighting trend that went on with all the major brands starting to adopt it. So Barnes & Noble did well on this one, I would say. Guess what they released in 2018, guys? An e-reader, right? No, actually, their 11th color tablet. This was the Barnes & Noble Nook Tablet 10.1. It really didn't do a whole lot to wow people. It was 1920 by 1200, 2 megapixel cameras all around, and it really didn't do very much aside from having a decent internal storage at the time, 32 gigs, and having 256 expandable storage. It also came with Google Play, so I suppose that in and of itself was good, but again, a lot of the styling cues from their successful tablets were gone. But to their credit, they didn't release another Samsung device, so I'll give them that much. It's 2019, their 10th year, 11 tablets later, only a few e-ink devices, and this happened. And it's good. This is the Nook Glowlight Plus, sharing its name entirely with the 2015 model, and as you see on the box, there really isn't anything else written but Glowlight Plus. They didn't say 7.8, they didn't say the 2019 edition, and they could have just called it the Nook Glowlight 4 because it has a glow light, and glow light's in the name. But it is a good device. It's a 7.8-inch e-reader, which they've never done before, 300 ppi, which they've touched on, glow light illumination, so they have night mode, they have the regular LEDs, but to be fair, about which we found in our reviews, from about 20% all the way to 100, it prioritizes the orange, which I'm kind of thinking they did that on purpose because the entire retail box is this glowing orange light. So most of the LEDs that power this device are orange, and if you go to 0, you get blue, really. It is waterproof, they have 8 gigs of storage, and they have an audio jack. They have a 3.5mm headphone jack, and that is great. Finally, Barnes & Noble comes out with something of their own. They kept the little N logo at the bottom. They didn't put the little screen at the bottom back, which I kind of think would be really cool for their 10-year anniversary, or re-release the first edition with super high-powered internals. Either way, out of a lot of flops, out of a lot of tablets, And out of some clunkers, and after, I don't even know, 5 device styling changes, one that looked like a bar of soap, one that had a rubber bouncy grommet on the outside, 2 that looked exactly the same, and finally this one that's a bigger, well, you know what, actually looks the same as the Glowlight 3, but bigger. They finally did it. They did something good, and it feels great. And aside from all the business politics and, you know, the mass amount of staff changes they went through, device pound for pound, in terms of devices, pound for pound, this is a good e-reader. Oh, look right there. So for a 10-year wrap-up of Barnes & Noble Nook, going from great to great, and a lot of stuff in between, for goodereader.com, this is Peter.